Have you ever been told you're not smart enough, not worthy enough, that your dreams are too big for someone like you? What would you do if the person who said those words also stole everything your mother worked for? Would you give up? Or would you fight back with every ounce of strength you had? His face went completely pale in that courtroom. The plaintiff's attorney, he started, then stopped. He recognized me. I was the stepdaughter he'd kicked out 10 years ago, the girl he'd told, "You'll never make it through college." And now, I was there to take back my mother's house from him. How far would you go to honor a parent's memory? How much would you sacrifice to prove wrong the person who destroyed your family? And when you finally get your chance for justice, standing face to face with the person who wronged you, how sweet is that moment? Let me take you back to where this all began, to the night my stepfather decided I was worthless, to the moment that would feel 10 years of determination, struggle, and ultimately, triumph. It was a Tuesday evening in October, 3 months after my mother's funeral. I was 25 years old, working double shifts at a diner and taking online business classes at night. I'd come home to the house I'd grown up in, my mother's house, the Victorian home she'd inherited from her parents, to find Frank sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. Frank Morrison had married my mother when I was 17. At first, he'd seemed nice enough, attentive to my mom, polite to me, financially stable. My mother, who'd been single for 8 years after my father's death, had been so happy to find companionship again. So happy that she'd ignored the small red flags I'd noticed. The way Frank's smile never quite reached his eyes. The way he slowly isolated her from her friends. The way he'd convinced her to add his name to the house deed for legal protection. After Mom died from cancer at 53, Frank's mask had slipped completely. The man who'd played the devoted husband became cold, calculating, and cruel. "We need to talk," he said that evening, not looking up from his papers. I set down my backpack, exhausted from a 10-hour shift. "About what?" "About your situation, about your future, about reality." He finally looked at me and his expression was pure disdain. "Rachel, let's be honest. You're 25 years old with no real education, no career prospects, and no money. Your mother spoiled you, let you believe you could be whatever you wanted. But she's gone now, and it's time you faced facts." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What are you saying?"
"I'm saying you need to move out. This house is mine now. Legally, properly mine. Your mother signed it over to me before she died. You've had 3 months to grieve and get your affairs in order. That's generous enough. This was Mom's house, her parents' house. She wouldn't have just given it to you. But she did." He pushed a document across the table. "See for yourself. 6 months before she died, she added me to the deed. Then, 2 months before she passed, she signed her portion over to me entirely. It's all legal and binding. The house is mine." I stared at the document, my hands shaking. It looked official, notarized stamps, legal language, my mother's signature at the bottom. But something felt wrong. My mother had been heavily medicated those last months, barely coherent sometimes from the pain medication. Had she really understood what she was signing? "Even if this is real," I said slowly, "I'm still family. I grew up here. Where am I supposed to go?" Frank shrugged, gathering his papers with meticulous care. "That's not my problem. You're an adult. Adults figure things out. Unless," he paused, a cruel smile playing at his lips, "unless you think you're not capable of that. Some people just aren't cut out for independent living. I can take care of myself. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a 25-year-old waitress with 2 years of online classes and no real prospects. Your mother used to make excuses for you, said you were finding yourself, that you'd figure it out eventually. But Rachel, some people just don't have what it takes to succeed. Have you ever had someone look at you like you're fundamentally defective? Like your very existence is proof of failure? That's how Frank looked at me in that moment. I'm going back to school, I said, lifting my chin. I'm going to get my degree. I'm going to make something of myself. He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through me like a blade. School? Rachel, you barely graduated high school. You've been taking online business classes for 2 years and have, maybe 30 credits? At this rate, you'll be 40 before you finish a bachelor's degree. And then what? You think some degree from a mediocre online program is going to change your life? I'm going to law school, I said. And even as the words left my mouth, I couldn't believe I'd said them. Law school? Where had that come from? I'd never even considered it before. But something about Frank's certainty that I was worthless made me want to prove him spectacularly wrong. The laughter that followed was even crueler. Law school? You? Rachel, law school is for smart people, dedicated people, people with resources and connections and intelligence. You have none of those things. You can barely afford to live, let alone pay for law school. And even if you somehow managed to get accepted, which you wouldn't, you'd never make it through. Law school destroys people stronger than you.
You don't know what I'm capable of. I know exactly what you're capable of. I've watched you for 8 years. You're mediocre, Rachel. Average at best. And average people don't become lawyers. They don't accomplish great things. They work dead-end jobs and live paycheck to paycheck and wonder why life is so hard. That's your future. Accept it. Each word was designed to destroy me, and they hit their marks with precision. Part of me wanted to collapse, to admit he was right, to give up on dreams that suddenly seemed impossibly distant. But another part of me, the part that was my mother's daughter, the part that remembered how hard she'd worked to give me opportunities, that part was filling with a rage so fierce it burned away the doubt. I'm going to prove you wrong, I said quietly. I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to become a lawyer. And Frank, when I do, the first thing I'm going to do is take this house back from you. Because I know my mother didn't willingly give you her home. She was dying and confused, and you manipulated her. You're a thief, and I'm going to prove it. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Fear? Worry? But it vanished quickly, replaced by that same condescending smile. Is that a threat? It's a promise. He stood, straightening his expensive suit jacket. Well, good luck with your little fantasy. But just so we're clear, I want you out by the end of the month. That gives you 3 weeks. Pack your things and go. And Rachel, when your grand plans fall apart, when reality crashes down and you realize you're not special enough or smart enough or strong enough to achieve your dreams, don't come crawling back here. This door will be closed to you forever. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with a document that proved he'd stolen my mother's house and a burning determination to make him regret every word he just said. I spent that night going through my mother's things, the boxes I'd been too grief-stricken to sort through before. In the back of her closet, I found a small fireproof safe I had never known existed. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before her death,
addressed to me in my mother's shaky handwriting. My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. Sorry I can't be there to see the amazing woman I know you'll become. Sorry I can't protect you from Frank anymore. I need to tell you something. 6 months ago, Frank convinced me to add his name to the house deed. He said it was for legal protection, for tax purposes. I was already sick, already scared, and I wanted to trust him. He was my husband. He promised to take care of you after I was gone.
But last week, he brought me papers to sign. He said they were for medical directives, for power of attorney. I was so heavily medicated, Rachel. The pain was unbearable, and I could barely focus. I signed what he put in front of me. Yesterday, when I was more lucid, I found copies of those papers. They weren't medical directives. They transferred the entire house into his name alone. He tricked me. He manipulated me when I was at my most vulnerable. I tried to call a lawyer, but Frank has taken control of my phone, my finances, everything. He says it's to help me focus on healing, but I know better now. He's isolating me, controlling me, planning to take everything. I don't have the strength to fight him, but you do. You're stronger than you know, smarter than you believe, more capable than you've ever given yourself credit for. Don't let Frank or anyone else tell you otherwise. The house is yours by right, Rachel. It's your inheritance, your birthright. Fight for it. Fight for yourself. And know that wherever I am, I'm so proud of you. All my love. Always. Mom. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. My mother had known. She'd known Frank was stealing from her, stealing from me, and she'd been too sick and controlled to stop it. But I could stop it. I would stop it. The next morning, I went to the public library and started researching elder abuse, undue influence, fraud, estate law. The more I read, the more I understood that what Frank had done was illegal, deeply, seriously illegal. But proving it would require evidence, expertise, and resources I didn't have, unless I became the resource. That afternoon, I applied to every law school in the Boston area. My grades weren't stellar. Frank was right about that. I'd been an average student, distracted and unfocused during my undergrad online classes. But I wrote my personal statement with every ounce of passion I had, explaining my mother's situation, my determination to fight elder abuse, my need to understand the law well enough to protect people like her. Most schools rejected me, but Suffolk Law School, a small, respected program that valued life experience as much as grades, offered me conditional acceptance. I'd have to maintain a 3.5 GPA my first year to remain enrolled. I'd have to prove myself every single day. The tuition was $45,000 a year. I had $3,000 in savings. The math was impossible. But I'd made a promise to my mother and to myself. Impossible just meant I'd have to work harder. I moved out of my mother's house right on schedule, taking only what I could fit in my beat-up Honda. Frank watched from the front porch as I loaded my car, that same condescending smile on his face.
Good luck with everything, Rachel. You're going to need it. I didn't respond. I just drove away, watching that Victorian house, my house, disappear in my rearview mirror. I found a room in a shared apartment in the worst part of the city. 4 roommates, 1 bathroom, rats in the walls, and a rent of $400 a month that I could barely afford. I took every scholarship, every grant, every student loan I qualified for. I worked 40 hours a week at the diner, took classes full-time, and studied until 2 a.m. every night. Did people say I couldn't do it? Absolutely. My roommates thought I was crazy. My coworkers at the diner said I was wasting my time.
Even my academic advisor suggested I might want to consider more realistic career options. But every time someone doubted me, I heard Frank's voice. You're not smart enough, not strong enough, not special enough. And that voice became fuel. My first year of law school nearly broke me. The workload was crushing. The competition was fierce. I was surrounded by students from prestigious universities who'd been preparing for law school their entire lives, while I was a waitress from a mediocre online program trying to keep up. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, mornings I wanted to quit, moments I thought Frank was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But I kept going. Because every time I thought about giving up, I thought about my mother, about her letter, about the house Frank had stolen, about the promise I'd made. I finished my first year with a 3.7 GPA. My professors started to notice me, not because I was the smartest student, but because I worked harder than anyone else. I asked more questions, I stayed later, I cared more. One professor in particular, Marcus Chen, took me under his wing. He taught property law and elder law, and when I explained my situation about my mother, about the house, about Frank, he became my mentor. What Frank did is called undue influence, Marcus explained one afternoon in his office. When someone in a position of power manipulates a vulnerable person into signing away their rights, it's fraud, and it's prosecutable. Can I prove it? It's been 3 years. The trail might be cold. You'd need evidence. Medical records showing your mother's condition when she signed, testimony from people who witnessed Frank's behavior, possibly financial records showing suspicious activity. It won't be easy. But Rachel, if anyone can build this case, it's you. Years 2 and 3 of law school flew by in a blur of classes, work shifts, studying, and case research. I spent every spare moment investigating Frank's actions, building my case piece by piece. I tracked down my mother's doctors. I found friends she'd been close to before Frank isolated her. I requested public records and financial documents. Slowly, methodically, I built a picture of systematic manipulation and theft. I graduated law school in the top 15% of my class. Not the top. I'd been too busy working and building my case to be valedictorian, but strong enough to get job offers from several firms. I accepted a position at a small firm specializing in elder law and estate litigation. The pay wasn't great, but the experience was exactly what I needed. I spent 2 years learning, practicing, honing my skills, building a reputation as someone who fought for clients others had given up on. And through it all, I never forgot about Frank, about the house, about the promise I'd made. On my 30th birthday, 5 years after graduating law school and 10 years after Frank kicked me out, I filed a lawsuit. Rachel Turner v. Frank Morrison, civil fraud, undue influence, seeking return of property and damages. The look on the process server's face when he handed Frank the papers was apparently priceless. I wasn't there to see it. I was in my small office, surrounded by case files, preparing for the fight of my life. But I would see Frank's face soon enough, in court, where I would prove that the girl he'd called worthless, the stepdaughter he'd dismissed as too stupid to succeed, was about to take back everything he'd stolen. Have you ever spent a decade preparing for a single moment? Have you ever built your entire career around one case, one goal, one chance to prove everyone wrong? That moment was coming, and I was ready. The weeks leading up to the trial were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though Frank didn't realize he was already losing. His lawyer, Martin Westbrook, was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive suit, prestigious firm, the kind of attorney who'd built his career defending wealthy men from inconvenient truths. He reached out to my firm 3 days after Frank was served, suggesting we discuss settlement options. I took the meeting at a neutral coffee shop downtown. Westbrook arrived 15 minutes late, a power play designed to establish dominance. I'd been prepared for that, having already ordered my coffee and spread out my files across the table. When he finally sat down, slightly breathless and annoyed, I was calmly reviewing my notes. "Ms. Turner," he began, not bothering with pleasantries, "I've reviewed your complaint. It's ambitious, I'll give you that, but surely you understand this is a waste of everyone's time. The property transfer was legal, properly executed, and happened a decade ago. The statute of limitations alone doesn't apply in cases of fraud discovered after the fact." I interrupted smoothly. "I'm sure you're familiar with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 260, Section 12. The discovery rule extends the statute of limitations when the fraud couldn't have been reasonably discovered earlier. I was 25, grieving, and had no reason to suspect my stepfather had manipulated my dying mother. I only found her letter 3 years after her death, which restarted the clock." He paused, recalibrating. "Your mother's letter. Yes, I've heard about that. A convenient document that conveniently supports your narrative. Do you have any proof it's authentic? Handwriting analysis? Witnesses to its creation?" "I have her handwriting samples from years of correspondence. I have testimony from 3 of her friends who knew she'd become suspicious of Frank in her final months. And I have medical records showing she was on morphine and fentanyl at the time she allegedly willingly signed away her home, medications that severely impair cognitive function and decision-making." Westbrook's jaw tightened slightly. Good. Let him realize this wasn't going to be the easy win Frank had probably promised him. He shifted tactics. "My client is willing to offer a settlement," he said. $50,000. You walk away, we avoid a messy trial, everyone moves on with their lives." $50,000? For a house worth at least $800,000. For my mother's legacy, for 10 years of my life spent preparing for this moment. I almost laughed. "Counteroffer," I said, closing my files and meeting his eyes directly. Frank returns the house, pays fair market rent for the 10 years he's occupied it, and covers my legal fees. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. That's not a settlement. That's a demand for total capitulation. Then I guess we'll see each other in court. I stood gathering my things. "Oh, and Mr. Westbrook, you might want to prepare your client for something. When we go to trial, when I present my evidence and call my witnesses, Frank is going to see exactly what the stupid stepdaughter he kicked out accomplished. I want him to know that every single day of the last 10 years, every all-nighter studying, every double shift at the diner, every moment of doubt and exhaustion, all of it was fuel. And now it's time to burn." I walked out of that coffee shop feeling more powerful than I had ever felt in my life. Let Frank think he could buy his way out of this. Let him underestimate me one more time. It would make the victory so much sweeter. Lisa, my best friend from law school and now a fellow attorney, called that evening. "How'd the settlement meeting go?" "Exactly as expected. They offered pocket change. I countered with justice. They declined." "So we're going to trial?" I could hear the excitement in her voice. Lisa had been with me through every step of this journey. The late-night study sessions, the breakdowns, the small victories. She'd volunteered to help with my case pro bono, handling research and filing motions while I focused on the bigger strategy. "We're going to trial," I confirmed. "Discovery starts next week. I need to request Frank's financial records, phone records, emails from the relevant time period. I also need to depose everyone who was around my mother in her final months." After they left with another load, Richard lingered in the driveway. I I could feel him watching me as I wrapped newspaper around a set of smaller pieces. "This gallery thing," he said finally, "it's not real, is it? He's just being nice because Paula works for him." Have you ever had someone so threatened by your potential success that they couldn't accept it might be genuine? That's where Richard was, unable to process that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about me. "It's real," I said, not looking up from my packing. "Very real." "Margaret, be sensible. These art types, they make promises they don't keep. They'll string you along, and then the exhibition will happen, nothing will sell, and you'll be right back where you started, broke and unemployed." "Maybe," I allowed. "Or maybe I'll surprise you. People like us don't get gallery exhibitions and six-figure sales. We're practical people, not artists." He said artists like it was a dirty word. "People like us?" I finally looked at him directly. "Richard, you don't know what kind of person I am. You stopped paying attention years ago. You decided I was worthless, and that became your truth, but it was never mine." I saw anger flash across his face, quickly suppressed. "I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to save you from disappointment. But fine, chase your little dream. When it falls apart, don't come crying to me." "I won't," I promised. "You've made it very clear that I'm on my own." He left then, and I felt something inside me settle. The last thread of hope that maybe he'd apologize, maybe he'd realize what he was throwing away, maybe he'd fight for our marriage. That thread finally snapped, and instead of pain, I felt relief. I was free. The next 3 months were the hardest I'd ever worked in my life. My new studio apartment was drafty and small, but the basement pottery space was perfect. I set up my wheel, my kiln, my glazing station, and my work tables. I hung good lighting and installed a dehumidifier. I created a space that was entirely mine, with no one to tell me it was pointless or silly or a waste of time. Paula stopped by most evenings after work, bringing dinner and company. "You're going to work yourself to death," she'd say, watching me shape clay at midnight. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I'll sleep after the exhibition," I'd reply, my hands never stopping their rhythm on the wheel. But it wasn't just about work. It was about transformation. Every piece I created carried a piece of my journey. The pain of rejection, the fury of being underestimated, the determination to prove my worth, not to Richard, to myself. I started an Instagram account for my work. Paula had been nagging me about it for years, but I'd always been too self-conscious. What if nobody liked it? What if people left mean comments? What if I put myself out there and got nothing but crickets? The night before trial, I barely slept. I went over my opening statement 100 times, rehearsed my examination of witnesses, prepared for every possible objection Westbrook might raise. Marcus stopped by my apartment around midnight with coffee and encouragement. "You're ready," he said, reviewing my notes with a professor's critical eye. "You've built an airtight case. Tomorrow, you're not just winning a lawsuit, you're vindicating your mother and proving that justice, real justice, is possible." What if I mess up? The fear came out before I could stop it. What if I freeze or forget something crucial or... "Rachel." Marcus set down the papers and looked at me directly. Do you remember when you came to my office 10 years ago? You were a first-year student, exhausted and overwhelmed, working 40 hours a week while taking a full course load. You told me about your mother and Frank, and you said you were going to become a lawyer specifically to fight this case. Do you remember what I said? I shook my head. I said it was impossible, that cases like yours almost never win, that you'd need a decade of evidence, expert testimony, and resources you didn't have. And you looked at me and said, then I guess I'll spend the next decade building an impossible case. And Rachel, that's exactly what you did. You didn't just become a lawyer. You became the lawyer specifically equipped to win this case. Tomorrow isn't about proving you can do this. Tomorrow is about showing the world what you've already accomplished. The next morning, I put on the suit I'd bought specifically for this trial. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, professional without being flashy. I styled my hair simply, put on minimal makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the scared 25-year-old who'd been kicked out of her childhood home. She wasn't the exhausted student working double shifts and crying from stress. She was Rachel Turner Esquire, attorney at law, a woman who'd spent 10 years preparing for this moment. Have you ever walked into a room knowing that everything you've worked for comes down to the next few hours? That your entire future hinges on your ability to perform under pressure? That feeling of terror and exhilaration combined, that's what I felt walking into that courthouse. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, but that made it feel more intimate, more personal. The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Perfect. I arrived early and set up my materials with meticulous care. Exhibits organized and labeled. Witness list prepared. Opening statement notes in front of me, though I'd memorized every word.
Lisa arrived next, squeezing my hand briefly before taking her seat at the plaintiff's table beside me. Then came Marcus, who'd taken a personal day to watch. Mrs. Rodriguez and two of my mother's other friends filled the gallery behind me, my small army. And then Frank arrived. I hadn't seen him in person in 10 years. He'd aged, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his mouth, a slight paunch that his expensive suit couldn't quite hide. But his expression was the same. Arrogant confidence mixed with disdain for anyone he considered beneath him. He walked to the defendant's table with Westbrook, laughing at something his lawyer had said, acting like this trial was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. He hadn't looked at me yet, hadn't even glanced in my direction, still dismissing me, even now. That was going to change very soon. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Williams entered and we all rose. When we sat back down, I felt Frank's eyes on me for the first time. I kept my gaze forward, not giving him the satisfaction of acknowledging him. Not yet. This is case number 2024 CV3847, the bailiff announced. Rachel Turner versus Frank Morrison, civil fraud and undue influence. Judge Williams reviewed her notes briefly. Is the plaintiff ready to proceed? I stood, my voice steady and clear. Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready. Is the defendant ready? Westbrook stood. Yes, Your Honor, though we maintain this is a frivolous lawsuit based on... You'll have time to make your arguments, Mr. Westbrook. Save it for your opening statement. Miss Turner, you may proceed with yours. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for a decade. I walked to the podium positioned between the two tables, my notes in hand, though I didn't need them. And finally, I looked directly at Frank. His expression was one of vague annoyance, like I was a mosquito buzzing around him. He still didn't understand. he still thought I was that scared kid he'd kicked out, that this was some desperate attempt to squeeze money from him. "May it please the court," I began, my voice carrying through the small courtroom. 10 years ago, Frank Morrison looked at me and said I was worthless. He said I wasn't smart enough to succeed. He said I'd never amount to anything. And then he kicked me out of my childhood home, a home he'd stolen from my dying mother through systematic manipulation and fraud.
I saw Frank's expression start to change, the annoyance flickering into something else. Uncertainty, maybe? "This case is about more than property," I continued. "It's about a man who married a widow, gained her trust, isolated her from her friends and family, and then manipulated her while she was cognitively impaired from cancer medication to sign away her most valuable asset. It's about elder abuse in its most calculated form, and it's about justice, delayed, perhaps, but not denied." I turned slightly, making eye contact with each juror before returning my gaze to Frank. "The evidence will show that Catherine Turner was a strong, independent woman who owned her home outright, a home passed down through 3 generations of her family. The evidence will show that within 6 months of marrying her, Frank convinced her to add his name to the deed. The evidence will show that 2 months before her death, while she was taking powerful narcotics that impaired her cognitive function, Frank presented her with documents he claimed were medical directives, but were actually property transfers giving him complete ownership. The evidence will show that he paid a notary public, a notary who has since lost her license, to notarize these documents despite Catherine's obvious confusion." Frank's face was changing color now, red creeping up his neck, his jaw clenching. He leaned over to whisper something to Westbrook, who shook his head slightly, telling him to stay calm. "Most importantly," I said, letting steel enter my voice, "the evidence will show that Catherine Turner knew she'd been tricked, that she tried to get help, that she left behind a letter I'll present to this court explaining exactly what Frank Morrison had done and begging me to fight for justice." I paused, letting the words sink in. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Frank Morrison told me I was worthless, that I'd never make it through college, let alone law school, that I was too stupid, too average, too mediocre to accomplish anything meaningful. I felt emotion threatening to overwhelm me and pushed it back. This wasn't the time. He was wrong. And over the next few days, I will prove not only that he committed fraud, but that the girl he dismissed as worthless became the attorney who will hold him accountable for his crimes. I returned to my seat, my hand shaking slightly from adrenaline. Lisa squeezed my arm under the table. When I finally looked at Frank again, his face was completely pale. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something I'd never seen before: fear. He'd finally recognized me, not as the scared kid he'd dismissed, but as the woman who'd spent 10 years preparing to destroy him. And the trial had just begun. Westbrook's opening statement was exactly what I had expected: polished, professional, and built entirely on technicalities rather than truth.
"Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "This is a case about a young woman who, understandably grief-stricken over her mother's death, has created a conspiracy theory to explain a simple legal property transfer. Catherine Turner was a competent adult who made a decision to secure her husband's future. Was she ill? Yes. Was she medicated? Yes. But the medical evidence will show she was lucid enough to understand her decisions. The defense will prove that this transfer was legal, proper, and in accordance with Catherine Turner's wishes.
He was good, I'd give him that. He made it sound reasonable, rational, just a widow taking care of her husband and a daughter who couldn't accept her mother's choices. But he hadn't seen my evidence yet. He didn't know about the letter, the testimonies, the financial records that painted a picture of systematic abuse. The first witness I called was Dr. Patricia Patterson, my mother's oncologist. She took the stand with the gravity of someone who understood the weight of her testimony. "Dr. Patterson," I began after she was sworn in, "how long did you treat Catherine Turner?" "Approximately 18 months, from her initial diagnosis until her death." "Can you describe her condition in the final 3 months of her life?" Dr. Patterson's expression was somber. Catherine was in stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The pain was severe and constant. We had her on a high-dose regimen of morphine and fentanyl, supplemented with other medications for nausea and anxiety. In your medical opinion, how would this medication regimen affect her cognitive function? Significantly. Opioids at that dosage level cause confusion, memory impairment, and difficulty with complex decision-making. I documented in my notes that Catherine often didn't remember conversations we'd had days earlier. She would sometimes not recognize where she was or what day it was. I pulled up a medical record on the screen. This is your note from September 15th, 2 months before my mother's death. Can you read the highlighted portion? Dr. Patterson adjusted her glasses. Patient, extremely confused today, asked 3 times why she was in the hospital when she was actually in the outpatient clinic. Husband present and appears to be answering questions on her behalf. Cognitive impairment from medication is severe. Recommend against any major decisions during this period. You recommended against major decisions, I repeated. Yet 3 days later, Catherine Turner signed documents transferring her house entirely into Frank Morrison's name. Were you aware of this? I was not. If I had been, I would have strongly advised against it. In my professional opinion, Catherine was not in a mental state to make such a significant legal decision.
Westbrook cross-examined aggressively, trying to establish that my mother had lucid moments, that not every second was marked by confusion. But Dr. Patterson held firm. Yes, there were better moments, but signing away your home isn't something you do in a better moment. It requires sustained understanding and decision-making capacity my mother simply didn't have. Next, I called the notary public, Sarah Chin. She was nervous, knowing her testimony could have professional ramifications beyond this case. Ms. Chin, did you notarize documents for Frank Morrison on September 18th, 10 years ago? Yes, her voice was barely above a whisper. Can you describe the circumstances? Mr. Morrison called me and said his wife needed documents notarized, but was too ill to come to my office. He offered to pay me $5,000 to come to their home. She paused, shame evident on her face. That was much more than my usual fee. I should have been suspicious. What happened when you arrived? Mrs. Turner was in bed, clearly very ill. She seemed disoriented. When I asked her if she understood what she was signing, she looked confused. Mr. Morrison answered for her, saying she understood perfectly. I asked her directly again, and she nodded, but I don't think she really knew what was happening. Yet you notarized the documents anyway. Yes. Tears filled her eyes. I needed the money. My daughter had medical bills. I told myself it was probably fine, that Mr. Morrison wouldn't lie about something so important. But I knew, deep down, I knew it was wrong. That's why when I heard about this lawsuit, I agreed to testify. I can't undo what I did, but I can at least tell the truth now.
Have you ever watched someone confess to enabling harm? It's simultaneously heartbreaking and validating. Sarah Chin had made a terrible choice, but her honesty now was crucial. Westbrook tried to discredit her, suggesting she was testifying to avoid legal consequences. But the damage was done. The jury had heard a notary admit she'd certified documents she knew were questionable. Mrs. Rodriguez took the stand next, and her testimony was devastating. She described how close she'd been to my mother, how they'd had lunch every Tuesday for 15 years, until Frank came along. After they married, Catherine started canceling our lunches, Mrs. Rodriguez testified, dabbing at her eyes. She'd say Frank had planned something, or she wasn't feeling well, or it wasn't a good time. When I called her, Frank would often answer and say she was resting. I tried to visit, but he turned me away at the door. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help her.
Yes, about 2 months before she died, she called from a neighbor's phone. She said Frank had taken her cell phone away, claimed it was stressing her out. She was crying, telling me she'd made a terrible mistake. She said Frank had tricked her into signing papers, that she'd given away her house, that she didn't know what to do. What did you say to her? I told her we'd figure it out, that I'd help her find a lawyer, that she wasn't alone. I told her I'd come over the next day. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice broke. But when I arrived, Frank said she was sleeping and couldn't be disturbed. He said she'd been confused from the medication, that she didn't know what she was saying, that I was upsetting her. He asked me not to come back. I tried calling, but he never let me speak to her again. The next time I saw Catherine was at her funeral. The courtroom was silent except for Mrs. Rodriguez's quiet crying. I saw 2 jurors wiping their eyes. Even Judge Williams looked affected. When I returned to my seat, I glanced at Frank. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. Westbrook whispered something to him, but Frank didn't respond. The next day, I presented the financial records. Lisa walked the jury through them with forensic precision, showing how Frank had systematically drained my mother's accounts after their marriage. Large withdrawals, transfers to his personal accounts, purchases of luxury items, a boat, expensive jewelry, a timeshare in Florida, all made with my mother's money while she was dying. These records show that Frank Morrison spent over $200,000 of Catherine Turner's money in the 18 months between their marriage and her death, Lisa explained. And 3 weeks after her death, 3 weeks after obtaining full ownership of her house, he took out a home equity line of credit for $300,000. He'd been planning this all along. Marry her, isolate her, take her money, steal her house, and profit from it all. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment I'd built this entire case around. I pulled out my mother's letter, sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. I'd had it authenticated by a handwriting expert, had compared it to dozens of other documents in my mother's hand. It was unquestionably genuine. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit 47, a letter from Catherine Turner to her daughter Rachel, written approximately 3 months before her death. Judge Williams examined the letter carefully. Any objection, Mr. Westbrook? He stood, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, we question the authenticity and admissibility of a letter conveniently discovered years after the fact.
Your Honor, I interrupted, we've provided extensive authentication. 3 handwriting experts confirmed this is Catherine Turner's writing. The paper and ink are consistent with the time period, and most importantly, the content directly corroborates testimony from multiple witnesses about Catherine's state of mind and Frank Morrison's actions. Judge Williams reviewed the authentication documents. I'll allow it. You may read the letter to the jury, Miss Turner.
This was it. I took a breath, steadying myself, and began to read my mother's final words aloud. My voice stayed mostly steady through the first part, her apology, her explanation of how Frank had tricked her, her realization of what he'd done. But when I reached the end, when I read her words about me, my voice broke. You're stronger than you know, smarter than you believe, more capable than you've ever given yourself credit for. Don't let Frank or anyone else tell you otherwise. The house is yours by right, Rachel. It's your inheritance, your birthright. Fight for it. Fight for yourself. And know that wherever I am, I'm so proud of you. I had to stop, to take a breath, to steady myself, to push back the tears that threatened to overwhelm me. When I looked up, several jurors were crying openly. Mrs. Rodriguez was sobbing in the gallery. Even Judge Williams had to take a moment to compose herself. And Frank was staring at the table, his face completely white, his hands trembling. For the first time since this began, he looked like what he was, a small, cruel man who'd been caught. Westbrook's defense crumbled quickly after that. He called Frank to the stand, a mistake in my opinion, but Frank probably insisted. Frank tried to paint himself as a devoted husband who'd simply been helping his wife with practical matters. But under my cross-examination, the facade fell apart. Mr. Morrison, you testified that you were helping my mother with her finances. Is that correct? Yes. By helping, do you mean spending over $200,000 of her money on luxury items for yourself? Those were joint purchases. A boat she never set foot on because she was too ill. A timeshare in Florida she never visited because she was dying. Jewelry for yourself? I pulled up receipt after receipt on the screen. These are joint purchases? His face reddened. I was entitled to. You were entitled to nothing. You'd been married less than 10 years. Under Massachusetts law, you'd need to be married 10 years to have any automatic claim to her separate property. But you didn't want to wait 10 years, did you? You wanted it all, and you wanted it now. So you manipulated a dying woman into signing away her home. That's not true.
Then explain the letter. Explain why my mother wrote that you tricked her, that she'd made a terrible mistake. Explain why she tried to contact a lawyer and you took away her phone. Explain why you isolated her from her friends. Explain. Enough! Frank's voice exploded through the courtroom. She was weak. She was always weak. She would have given everything to Rachel, left me with nothing after I'd taken care of her, after I'd put up with her illness and her complaints and her pathetic daughter who couldn't even hold down a job. I deserved that house. I earned it. The courtroom erupted. Judge Williams banged her gavel. Westbrook looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. And I just stood there, looking at Frank as he realized what he'd just admitted. So you do admit, I said quietly once order was restored, that you took the house not because my mother willingly gave it to you, but because you felt entitled to it, because you earned it. Those are your words, Mr. Morrison, not mine. He tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The jury had heard everything they needed to hear. Closing arguments were almost anticlimactic.
Westbrook tried valiantly to salvage the case, but Frank's outburst had destroyed any credibility they'd built. My closing was simple, direct, and emotional. Frank Morrison told me 10 years ago that I was worthless, that I'd never accomplish anything, that I was too stupid, too average, too mediocre to succeed. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost believed him. But then I thought about my mother, about her strength, her kindness, her belief in me. And I realized that Frank Morrison's opinion of me didn't define my worth. His cruelty didn't determine my future. Only I could do that. I looked at each juror in turn. I spent 10 years preparing for this moment. I worked full-time while going to law school. I studied until 2 a.m. every night. I built this case piece by piece, document by document, witness by witness. Not for revenge, for justice. For my mother, who died believing she'd lost everything. For every person who's ever been manipulated by someone they trusted. And yes, to prove that Frank Morrison was wrong about me. I paused, letting the words settle. The evidence is overwhelming. The letter, the medical records, the testimony, the financial documents. Frank Morrison's own words on the stand. He stole my mother's house through fraud and manipulation, and now I'm asking you to give it back. Not because I need it, because it's right. Because justice, real justice, matters. Thank you. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, I couldn't read their faces. Lisa gripped my hand under the table. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Williams asked. The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?"
In the matter of Rachel Turner versus Frank Morrison, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. We find that Frank Morrison did commit fraud and undue influence. We order the immediate return of the property located at 47 Maple Street to Rachel Turner. We further award damages in the amount of $400,000 for unjust enrichment and emotional distress. The courtroom exploded with sound. Mrs. Rodriguez was cheering, Marcus was applauding, Lisa was hugging me, both of us crying. And Frank? Frank sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and devastation. Everything he'd stolen, everything he'd built on my mother's suffering, gone, returned to the worthless girl he'd dismissed. Judge Williams banged her gavel for order. "Mr. Morrison, you have 30 days to vacate the property and return it to Ms. Turner in the condition it was received. You are also ordered to pay the damages awarded by the jury. This court is adjourned." I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I was floating. 10 years of work, 10 years of doubt and struggle and determination, and it had led to this complete, total, undeniable victory. Frank tried to corner me in the hallway as I was leaving. Westbrook was holding him back, but Frank was desperate. "Rachel, please, we can work something out. I'll give you the house, but the damages, I don't have that kind of money. Please, we're family." I turned to face him, and for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't intimidated or diminished or made to feel small. We were never family, Frank. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't tell a grieving daughter she's worthless. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You wanted to know if I'd make it through college, through law school, if I'd amount to anything? Well, here's your answer. I just destroyed you in court. I took back everything you stole, and I did it all while becoming exactly the person you said I'd never be. So thank you, Frank. Thank you for giving me the motivation to prove you spectacularly wrong." I walked away,
leaving him standing there, and I never looked back. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of 47 Maple Street, my mother's house, my house, with a key in my hand and tears streaming down my face. The house needed work. Frank had let things deteriorate, had taken out that equity line and put the money who knows where, but it was mine. Legally, finally, completely mine. I walked through the room slowly, remembering the kitchen where Mom had taught me to bake, the living room where we'd watch movies on Friday nights, the back porch where she'd kept her garden. In my mother's old bedroom, I found a spot of wallpaper that was slightly torn. Behind it, tucked into the wall, was a small envelope with my name on it in Mom's handwriting.
Inside was a short note. If you're reading this, you won. I knew you would. I'm so proud of you, my darling girl. Now make this house a home again. Fill it with love and laughter and life. That's what it deserves. That's what you deserve. Love always, Mom. I sat on the floor of that empty bedroom and cried. For my mother, for the years of struggle, for the girl I'd been, and the woman I'd become. My phone buzzed, a text from Lisa. Celebration dinner tonight? You're buying, rich girl. I laughed through my tears. The jury award of $400,000, combined with what I'd saved from my law practice, meant I could renovate the house and still have financial security. More importantly, I had my career, my skills, my proof that I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. Frank Morrison had filed for bankruptcy, I'd heard through the legal grapevine, lost everything. His reputation, his assets, his freedom to steal from anyone else. There was even talk of criminal charges for elder abuse. Did I feel sorry for him? Not even a little. Later that evening, I hosted a small gathering at the house. Lisa, Marcus, Mrs. Rodriguez, and a few other people who'd supported me through this journey. We sat on folding chairs in the empty living room, drinking wine and eating takeout pizza. To Rachel, Marcus raised his glass, who proved that determination and justice can overcome even the worst adversity. To Catherine, Mrs. Rodriguez added, her voice thick with emotion, who raised an extraordinary daughter. To second chances, Lisa said, squeezing my hand, and to making people regret ever underestimating you. I raised my own glass, looking around at the people who'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. To family, the kind you choose, the kind that builds you up instead of tearing you down. And to my mother, who gave me the strength to fight even when she couldn't fight anymore. We drank and talked and laughed, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 10 years. Peace. Not because the fight was over, though it was, not because I'd won, though I had, but because I'd honored my mother's memory, proved my own worth, and created a future built on my own strength rather than someone else's cruelty. Frank Morrison had told me I was worthless. He'd said I'd never make it, never succeed, never amount to anything. And standing in my mother's house, my house, surrounded by people who loved me, with a law degree on my wall and a victory in court behind me, I could finally say with absolute certainty, he couldn't have been more wrong. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone? Told you weren't smart enough, strong enough, or capable enough to achieve your dreams? What did you do? Did you prove them wrong, or are you still fighting that battle? And here's the harder question. If you could stand face to face with the person who hurt you most, who stole from you or destroyed something precious,
and you had the power to bring them to justice, would you? Or would part of you still be afraid they were right about you? I spent 10 years preparing for one moment. 10 years of doubt, exhaustion, and people telling me to give up. But every time someone said it was impossible, I heard my mother's voice reminding me I was stronger than I knew. Maybe you're facing your own impossible battle right now. Maybe someone told you you'll never succeed, that your dreams are too big, that you should just accept your limitations. If that's you, I want you to know something. They're wrong. Just like Frank was wrong about me, just like everyone who doubted you is wrong. The question isn't whether you can prove them wrong. It's whether you will. Whether you'll put in the work, make the sacrifices, and refuse to quit even when it feels impossible. So, tell me in the comments, what's your impossible goal? What are you fighting for? What would you do if you had the chance to prove your doubters spectacularly wrong? Share your story, because maybe your battle isn't over yet. Maybe like me, you're still building your case, one day at a time. And maybe 10 years from now, you'll be standing in your own courtroom, watching the person who underestimated you realize they should have believed in you all along. What's your fight? Let's talk about it.